Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Life Sciences Virtual Trailblazer Group. We are in our May meeting, and today we're going to be talking about Salesforce adoption, which is one of the biggest challenges that every organization faces with Salesforce. Whether you are rolling it out brand new, you're rolling out a new module, shifting the way that you're changing it, adding an integration, Salesforce adoption is always a bit of a challenge. So today, we're really excited to have Larry Hill, who thinks specifically about opportunity management and how to drive adoption in that particular use case. And before we kick it off with Larry, I want to talk to you just a little bit about the user adoption framework that I came up with for my PhD dissertation, just to recenter everybody on the way that we get adults excited about using technology that maybe we're really pumped about, but they aren't necessarily on board with yet. And I say yet because I know it can be done. So, just to orient you to all of the research that I did, that was a qualitative research study, and I had to review 100 pieces of literature that talked about software, CRM software, how it could be adopted. And so I centered on three eventual seminal theories that would tie together to talk about CRM adoption. And those are change management theory, which is how do you excite somebody to change the way that they are doing things, knowing full well that adults like to just keep doing things the way that they're already doing them because it's easiest, and our heuristics, our synapses say just travel down the path of least resistance. So thinking about change management is a critical way to help people to start to use the system, process, or technology a little bit better than they are now. Next is the diffusion of innovations theory, which is just like when you think about, I think about it like a hair diffuser. How do you spread an idea? So, how do you make sure that this concept is accepted and also pulled forward by most people? And so, when you think about a new piece of technology or a new solution, particularly when we're thinking about the life sciences, you're often saying, how do we get people to accept that there's a new way to do something and that they should be excited about it? And this diffusion of innovations theory centers around that typical bell-shaped curve that you see if you've read the book Crossing the Chasm. You're going to be familiar with this. If you haven't, I recommend you read it right away. It is interesting reading. It is not light reading. It's not going to be your beach book that you're going to take and open up and have yourself an adult beverage, but it is well worth your time. If you have not read Crossing the Chasm, it talks about the majority and how to motivate the majority to use something really critical for us when we're in regulated environments like the life sciences, on how we get people to adopt our theories. And Shauna, you mentioned kappas before. Even when we think about something like a kappa, nobody's really pumped to do one, but we need them to do it. So when you're thinking about an idea in this regulated environment, spreading the concept and getting people understanding and accepting is critical for diffusion. And then finally is adult learning theory. And I think that's what Larry's going to be talking about most today in his application. And that is adults choose to learn because they want to. So hopefully nobody is here today against their will. You're here because you are interested in learning about the topic. This is totally different than children, right? Pedagogy, that PED beginning was the same as pediatrics. That tells you it's about children. Children don't have a choice. They have to go to school. They have to learn. They have to learn the things that, have been set about for them for regulations. Adults are not quite the same. We opt into learning. We spend more time learning the things that interest us. So the combination of those three theories make a framework that helps to drive user adoption when you're thinking about any system, but particularly Salesforce, and particularly in the life sciences, which are come with a very heavy use case. I'm happy to introduce everybody to my friend and now yours, Larry Hill, because if you're not connected to Larry on LinkedIn, I really recommend you do. And Larry's going to talk to us a little bit today about a theory that he had about opportunity management that would help users to use it. And so, Larry, I'm going to kick it over to you.
Sounds good. Thanks a lot, Shannon. Yes, the basic idea, I've been a CRM user for, gosh, going back to ACT in the 90s, so pretty close to 30 years. And I have to admit, I never met one I really liked. Never met one I really like to use. I mean, I constantly would think, did they talk to a salesperson when they designed this app? Like a lot of people, I got into Salesforce in, God, I think going back in 2011 when it was just Classic, which is basically fields on a database, but it was on the cloud. And I didn't have to manage earlier systems. I'd had to sync them with a laptop. The sync always broke. You didn't know whether you were taking your contacts with you when you were going off someplace. There were just myriad problems with the original client server approach there. So what I've done since is basically a couple of years ago, Salesforce came out with a new API, a new technology called Lightning Web Components. And if you've noticed regular Lightning speed up in the last 3, 4 years, it's because they're rewriting all of those base components into Lightning Web Components. And it's the next generation of development framework replacing Aura. It's the whole future of Salesforce. It also happens to be a lot more efficient. You can do some very interesting things in terms of user experience. So speaking to Shannon's theories there, certainly the adult learning theory, you got to give people something that's easy to learn, but it's also exciting. So I would say within the change management, typically when salespeople see this application that I've created, which is the Express Console, they get real excited because the bottom line on it is it's about 50% of the clicks needed to manage opportunities. And I focused on opportunities because if you really think of it, that is the guts of a salesperson's day. Once a deal, they may or may not be doing prospecting, but what most of enterprise reps are doing is trying to close deals. So ideally, they would spend 80% of their day on their pipeline working deals. So I've taken that as an assumption. I've reimagined the entire opportunity management tab within Lightning. So I guess if I'm good to share here, I will give you a look right now. We'll do for the entire screen. Confirm to me if we can see that.
Looks good, Larry.
Yeah. So this is the familiar Lightning. This is the Lightning everybody's been using for years. And it does have the flexibility. Salesforce had an interesting premise, what is it? I guess 8 or 9 years ago now, when they created Lightning, was to do a no-code capability to move, resize, and position components around on a screen. Great idea. And you could argue that in combination with being first to the cloud and flexibility, that's what has gotten them a number one position in the marketplace, larger than the next 4 or 5 vendors out there. Who even knows who number two is, right? It's such a massive difference. They came up with a very interesting idea. Unfortunately, they did it a little bit before Web 2.0 standards were out. So it was a little slow, a little clunky. It was a misnomer Lightning back in the day because it was really slow. It was much slower than Classic. Pretty much everybody knows that. That's no secret. They have sped it up. I don't know if it's the same speed as Classic is these days, but it does give you that flexibility with what they had called no code. They're now calling low code if you want to do some special things, some flows and so forth. But it gives you a user interface that looks pretty much like this. You'll just see this is the opportunity tab, regular Lightning opportunity tab. Now, a couple issues with it. First of all, they've architected it so it could squeeze down into an iPad, right? So there's a lot of wasted space. So if you take a look, you're looking at 40% of the screen here, and you get to see what? Six activities, not and a lot of white space. If you want to take a look at stage history here, it gives you a little bit of a history. You can go out to view all, but it gives you a huge grid that it's hard to pick out the difference of like what actually happened from time to time. So taking this as the base, which is it's usable, but from my perspective, it's not ideal. I created the Express Console. And as you can see, it's a much cleaner, more compact user interface than you get in regular Lightning. Now, very importantly, it just shows up as another tab. So if you've got a bunch of tabs, which everybody does in your Lightning setup, all you got to do is just add this tab in, put it wherever you want it. All the other ones still work just fine. Opportunities are still there, but the Express Console is a tab and it focuses just on opportunity management. So I've got a couple of different views that I'll go through. We'll start with the pipeline view because that's where most salespeople live. If you think a day in the life, salesperson comes down in the morning and go, okay, where am I with all these deals? What have I got to do? Which rocks do I have to push uphill today to try and get towards a deal? And this actually parallels the manual process that I used for years, which is just an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper that had all my deals down the one side with tasks associated with it. And it gave me some sense of where I was in each one of the deals. So what I've tried to do is mirror that to a certain extent, but with an electronic approach to it. So the basic idea here is you can see two screens. Like ACT 25 years ago, if you click on something on the left, you get the details on the right. Very simple. And what I've tried to do is take again, a more compact view of this. So if you take a look at a given deal, and I'll pick the edge one, you've got a section here for products where you can add products. You've got a stage history. Now you compare this to the one I just showed you in Lightning. And I don't know if you can see on the Zoom, but there's a highlighting behind each change that was made to the deal. Sales managers love this because they can look very easily and see what the progression of a deal was. Key tasks. So if your sales methodology uses tasks for opportunities and like key ones to switch between or to move from one stage to another, these are very easy to fill in here. And then they're recorded for anyone's review. I've built in contact roles here. One of the issues that I always ran into with regular Salesforce is you have, for an opportunity, there's just way too many activities in a deal. And it's hard to pick out between emails and left messages and all that flutter out there. So what I've done is I've made it easy to assign roles here. You just jump right out to the regular Salesforce role assignment. And this is very typical of the Express console. It's built to interoperate with all the rest of Lightning. So it's easy to jump out to a different page, a regular Lightning page, and then with a single click and in about a quarter of a second, you're right back to where you were.
Hey Larry, can I pause you here because
Oh, sure.
I think you're talking about something that is interesting for everybody, and I know Chana managed or Chana messaged us, told us about how she's using an application that helps to track kappas, and so I think this is a good time for us to pause and just talk strategically or philosophically about what is the difference between having a Salesforce native application, the Salesforce sort of standard view and standard objects, iframing in, an integration that sends you out. And I think this is really critical to the adoption conversation. And if you wouldn't mind, Larry, just talking to us a little bit philosophically about the way that you can build on Salesforce, and then specifically how you chose to build Express Console so that it sat natively inside of Salesforce.
Yeah, yeah, and that is crucial. I'm not sure on the app you were talking about there that it was TrackWatch, right? If it's a Salesforce app, I'm guessing that it shows up in the same way the Express Console does as just more tabs, or do you have a completely different user interface?
Your interface that I'm viewing here looks very similar to what I'm working off of.
Ah, okay, okay. So you would have tabs for the various TrackWatch functions across the top here in the same way that Lightning does?
That is correct.
Yeah, so I think what was important in our design was that the problem with third-party apps, there's a lot of apps that connect to Salesforce and you live in sales in that app and it just accesses the data in Salesforce. The admins have got to maintain that. And those integrations break all the time. You have different releases. Most of them say that it's a major pain for them to have to maintain those. Plus, you have a completely different user interface. What I've shot for here is if you notice all the icons, the fonts, the colors, everything here is pretty much the same as regular Salesforce. So it's going to be familiar to a rep as they come in. It'll just be easier to use. And it could coexist with any other applications that you've got that use the same approach of just inserting their own tab. Does that make sense?
Yes, it truly makes sense. Although some of the components here that you're mentioning are not things that we use on my platform, but I am understanding where you're going with this.
Yeah, we're one of your reps. They use opportunities, right? They track opportunities within Salesforce.
No, we don't. Like I said, it's just a repository for management of kappas. We track the creation, the establishment of the CAPA, and the process, the workflow along the way of managing the CAPA. That's pretty much all we do in this platform.
Oh, okay. But do they, within Salesforce, do they manage opportunities there? The salespeople?
So I don't know what other departments or other functional areas use the platform for. I can only speak to my small
Yeah.
component of work.
Okay. Okay. The best practice out there certainly is to use opportunities. For the salespeople, if they're chasing deals, typically the opportunity is the container for that. And what I've tried to do is make it much easier for you to manage that. So if you take a look at most sort of forecast screens, they're most people still using Excel. Some people are using the Salesforce forecasting app now, but it's basically a grid that looks like this. And what you get is you get certain columns, and you may or may not be able to sort on those. But basically, it's just what are the numbers, right? And the innovation that I've tried to do with the Express Console is to say, what if you could actually look into that opportunity and see the last, I don't know, 4, 5, 6, maybe even as much as 10 different activities that have gone on with that opportunity. And then within those, wouldn't it be great instead of going off to a different screen if you got a pop-up by hovering on any one of them, and you could just very quickly investigate different activities like that. And then wouldn't it be great also if that if it opened in edit mode? Because one of the biggest pains that I've got with regular Salesforce is you have to go find the thing you want to edit, and then you got to go into edit mode. It's another response time cycle, and then you got to save it, and it's too long for either notes or different activities. So what I've done here is that all of the pop-ups in this app show up in edit mode. So I can just type, and it takes me to the end of each section. And then if the various fields have already been filled in, status, priority, and everything, and I've done an edit, it takes me straight to save, and I can just save it very quickly. So it makes editing of different items within Salesforce much easier. You've also got the situation that I mentioned before where Salesforce, every time you click on an object, a contact, an opportunity, or an account, takes you off to a different screen, and then you've got to come back. So what I've built into this is the ability for cascading. So within the contact, if you want to take a look at what's an email and send a quick email, you can do it right there, much easier. If I want to take a look further at the company, I've got some company information here, and then I can use the right-hand side of the screen to expand out, and that company pops up on the right side. So
Larry,
yeah.
can you talk to us about the cascading? Because I don't know that I've seen this in any other application, and I am interested in the way that you can stay in one screen without having to open new ones. Is that something is it native? Is it something that we could do to other apps that we're using?
Well, it's funny, and you can pin it here. I showed this to a Salesforce user experience product manager 4 years ago. And I kept looking inside Lightning for something to show up. And I finally, about a year ago, found the first cascading pop-up. I think it's the future of user experience here.
Yeah.
Not to overstate it, but personally, I am tired of going off to different screens, having to come back, going off to different screens and having to come back.
Right. Yeah, I think users don't. Anytime you take a user out of the environment that they're in, it becomes frustrating and challenging to follow along with. And as you're showing this, I'm like, wow, I would really to have this in
Yeah.
everything I use in Salesforce.
And even beyond, I got this original idea from Wikipedia of all places. You take a look at a Wikipedia page and it's got all these hot links that you can hover on, and it gives you the top 5 or 6 lines of the article that it would take you to. And I just thought that was great. But then I was thinking between the 3 contacts, accounts, and opportunities, I'm always wanting to switch back and forth and see the key information, like with what's the title, what's the email address, so forth. And then I built in some flexibility here that says if the information that I want to see is not here, got a little lightning icon, and it will take you straight out to the default page layout for that object. So this is my default for the contact, Sean Forbes, and you've got the typical Salesforce. You got to choose one or the other here. But then you can go very quickly, and I'll say when I hit click so you can see how fast this is. So click, and you are literally exactly back where you were in the Express console. And the other piece of that, this dual sort of dual display mode, is I can do a completely different search over here on the right side and jump into a contact totally independent of the left side. So they're not tied. Anything you click over here shows up on the right, but you can do an entirely independent. And then there's within that, any object that you want to click on, you can go to that one and it gives you the little breadcrumb trail here. So the original idea for this was for laptops back in the day when salespeople went out on the road and they were in a hotel room one morning getting ready for the day. What I tried to do is put the most functionality into basically a single laptop screen. So that's where the dual comes. So this one can operate as a completely separate display, or it can be a slave to the one on the left. And any of the objects, as I mentioned before, that you've got here can be expanded out to the right side if you want to see more details. So I've been thinking this is where, when you say 50% fewer clicks, this is how this application is much easier for salespeople to use than you might find in regular Lightning. And it's got a number of different shortcuts in it. Like I've got a little expand here. One of my pains with Salesforce is that there's always a scroll, or you get this tiny little space that you have to drag and drop. So what I've built into it is a quick ability to go to almost full screen height when you're taking a look at a note, add something in, go right to save, and you've updated the note. So it's much easier to operate with as a salesperson, because one of the issues, if you're in any kind of a complex territory, there's a lot of to-dos. There's a lot of things to keep track of. So what I also built into this app is an integrated to-do list. And this is basically any item that has today's date on it. So you put an activity with today's date, or as you come into a new day, anything that you put out into the future that has this date shows up right here, with the same ability to hover and cascade. If I want to make a phone call and I've got telephony set up, I could just click on this and make a phone call. It's a much easier way of managing your tasks, and something you might not have seen in Salesforce before, but drag and drop. What do you say? So what I've done here is I've got all the calls I'm going to make today, all the other tasks that I need to do. And then if I've got my calendar integrated, I've got my events. And Lightning Web Components lets you do some interesting things, like Salesforce does not itself have a separate call activity. It's a subtype, but there's no way in regular Salesforce to distinguish between calls. And salespeople like to say, you know what? I'm going to block an hour and I'm going to make some calls this morning. And wouldn't it be nice to be able to put these all in one place? So the way we've done it is that within the code, if the first word of an activity is call, it shows up here. And you can be clever about it. There's no redundancy in terms of call Jack, call Edna, call Bill. We can actually strip that out for this display and just say, you're making calls and this is who you're calling and what you're calling about. So it makes to-dos much easier, and it begins to incent salespeople to actually keep their tasks inside Salesforce, which is a huge bonus for sales management. It gives an order of magnitude, more data for a deal. Sales manager can see a lot more of what's going on inside a deal if all of the tasks for that deal show up right here within the application. And also stripped out, you can do things like hide email activities, because there's a lot of dreck in any activity list of Salesforce. And most of it is emails that are establishing and confirming meetings. There's 50 of them in there. You ready? No, change time. No, change time. Everybody in? No, I'm in. No, can we change the time? You want to cut all that out so you can dig right into exactly what is going on. What are the logged calls and the activities going on with a given opportunity? Let
This
me
is
pause there, see if we got
Yeah,
any.
this is awesome, Larry. I think what you've shown us is a lot of the art of the possible, the things that could be done in Salesforce that would help to drive user adoption. I think you've really been thoughtful about the end user, and a lot of times we see gorgeous technology that sort of forgets about the user experience. And
Yeah, yeah.
anytime you drag down on somebody's process, it makes them more hesitant to use the platform. And I think Express Console is the future of opportunity management. And as a sales user, I would absolutely love this. I think just before we wrap, I do want to invite everybody to let me know if there's a topic or a speaker that you want. I can reach out to the Salesforce community and Salesforce themselves to help us bring on the people that we would love to hear speak. I do want to remind everybody that we do have this meeting typically once a month at 11 a.m. Eastern on the second Friday. Our July speaker on July 11th is going to be Brian Murphy, who is going to talk to us about architecting for success and using discovery as a consultation tool when thinking about Salesforce architecture, which is going to be absolutely incredible. So I invite everybody to join for that. If you yourself have a topic that you'd like to bring, we'd love to hear it. This is the community for those of us in the life sciences who are using Salesforce. So while we love and respect our friends in healthcare, we are specifically focused on the life sciences disciplines here, the pharma, medtech, clinical research, diagnostics, genomics. That is the tribe that we're looking for and looking to attract. So please do invite your friends. We would love to have them here. I think it is exciting to be in this growing community of people who are here to answer your questions. You can't necessarily call your competitor and say, hey, friend over there, what are you doing? But this is a group of people who are willing to be helpful and share. Larry, I appreciate so much you giving us this demo today and sharing.
Yeah.
I know I've got one
Yeah,
interesting question that I think everybody might be curious to know about, and that is when you were looking at the security review process, when you submitted Express
yeah.
Console to Salesforce, how long did it take for them to approve your application?
It was a couple of months, and because frankly, my app broke the security application. They were not set up to evaluate Lightning Web components. I was
Wow.
literally the first big application to go through the process, and it broke it. And they came back and said, "No, you failed. You got to change it. You got to take this and this out." And I said, "Yeah, those are the key functions in the application. We're not taking those out." And I actually had an excellent partner at a company called Extentia. And literally, the general manager of Extension knew the head of the App Exchange and called him up and said, "Hey, it's me. We're not trying to fake anything here. You can't evaluate a Lightning Web Components app. Trust me, this one's good." And it got it through. But that's literally what it took. It took months.
That's so cool. Thanks for sharing that with us because looking at the group that we have today, I know everybody on here is now or was an end user
Mhm.
first. And I think we're always wondering what happens behind that big green curtain at Salesforce.
It's absolutely necessary. They got to vet it because they're letting you inside. I don't have to have a data center. My data center is Salesforce's data center. And so it's a very valid process, but the algorithm they've got to evaluate, they need to keep it up to date so that they can evaluate things like Lightning Web Components.
Larry, for everybody who's watching this recording, and I think the people who are on now, I think we're always curious about like where to find the next kind of like big idea in Salesforce. So you're like obviously a really plugged in person, a ton of people in the ecosystem. So like where are you going to learn about some of the awesome new products that maybe people aren't hearing about?
I do. I peruse the App Exchange. I'm always looking at competitors there. That's the obvious place to look. I've got some Google searches out there on Salesforce announcement, but it's usually events.
Yeah.
I take a look at their release notes. Before I even envisioned doing the Express Console here, I was always excited about like what do they got new in terms of user
Yeah.
experience? And I found that each, three releases a year, there was almost
Yeah.
nothing. Like they froze Lightning and they said it is good enough for demos. We're not going to do a lot of innovating. They've sped it up and they've done some interesting things. And they do. I can't even remember where that cascading pop-up is, but they did have the idea of trying out a cascading pop-up. But I look at the notes for Salesforce, and then I've got a bunch of Google searches out there in terms of what else new is coming along. And certainly there are some, but Salesforce has a lock on the CRM business here. And I typically look to them first for innovations. And I don't see a lot in terms of user experience.
I think Vince definitely makes sense, but it's going to be an interesting next couple of years. That's for sure, Larry. Thanks for answering my question. I appreciate you.
Sure. The one quickie there is artificial intelligence has absolutely buried everything for the last year. Mark Benioff said, "Thou shalt not speak about anything Agent Force," about 9 months ago. And it's funny. I went to one of the last World Tour in New York back in November, and I walked up to a number of booths and said, "So, show me your Agent Force demo." And there was like 5 seconds of awkward silence. And I finally said, "Just kidding. I know nobody's got one yet." And they all laughed and said, "Oh, yeah, you're right. God, we're working on it, but we don't really have anything yet." So I'm still waiting for that. The future, absolutely. I'd love to be able to talk to Salesforce and say, "Bring up my 3 deals with these 3 conditions," and not type anything. That'd be super. And I'm going to follow on. I'm looking for what's the first killer AI app or function that pops up. And the nice thing about Lightning Web Components is I can build that right in. I can put a button someplace. It's easy, but I haven't seen a consensus yet on what people consider usefully cool.
I love that. Usefully Cool sounds like a band name. So catch Larry and his band Usefully Cool soon. Thank you so much, Larry, for presenting today. Thank you, everybody, for joining. I wish everybody a beautiful, restful, and unremarkable weekend. And I will see you all soon. Thanks for joining.
Thanks.